Thank you everyone for coming. I'm very pleased to introduce this masterclass on digital discharge, the third masterclass of 5, which forms part of the Local Government Association CHIP Digital Support Offer. My name's Georgia. I'm from the LGA CHIP Digital team, leading on this programme, which is funded by NHSX, now NHSTD, of course. It's great to be working with Rethink partners on this programme, who've developed a really useful tool for the masterclass today. But before we get to that, there's just a few ground rules we'd like to cover. If we could have the next slide, please, Elle. We recommend you turn your videos off to ensure best connectivity. If you can please put yourself on mute as well to avoid audio interference, that would be much appreciated. Please do hold your questions until our Q&A. However, you can add them in the chat if you wish. If you do ask a question or have any comments, please do state your name and organisation. As you can see, we've started recording this webinar, as we'll be sharing the recording alongside the slides, materials and Q&As in an email soon after the session. If you do wish, you can also tweet about this event online via the hashtag LGA Digital, but please be aware that if you do tweet, others may not wish to feature. Next slide, please, Elle. So today we'll be covering why hospital discharge is a key time to consider technology. We'll discuss some of the tech adoption challenges unique to the hospital pathway, and we'll hear council and NHS experiences of using technology in discharge. If I could have the next slide, please, Elle. You can see we're really lucky to have with us together today Julie Harrison from Birmingham City Council taking us through Care Tech in Action, and Lena Ramsden from NHSEI talking about virtual wards. But first we have Rethink Partners CEO Claire Morris, who'll be talking to us about hospital discharge and technology. So I'll pass straight on to her. Thanks, Claire.
Lovely, thanks, Georgia. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see some familiar and some new faces on the session this morning. There are two kind of themes to the session this morning. So obviously it's about technology and how it can be used as part of the discharge pathway. But kind of woven throughout that is also the kind of theme of integration, really, and joint working between social care and the NHS. And if ever there was a time and a moment where that needs to work really well together, it is very much as people are getting ready to be discharged from hospital and during those first really crucial weeks when people come home. So really great to have Lena here with us today. And I know joint working between NHS and social care is always a topic that all of you are interested in. So do feel free to kind of pick Lena's brains and pose some of those opportunities and challenges when we get to the discussion point. Next slide, please, Elle. So some of you might know or remember that I used to work in the NHS and I led a CCG for 5 years in Essex. And hospital discharge was and remains a bit of a passion of mine. And that was really brought to life for me when Essex County Council actually commissioned some research, probably about 10 years ago now, about the impact of hospital discharge on older people and their long-term outcomes. And it really kind of shocked me and woke me up to this issue. What that research showed very much was just how much hospital admission and a hospital stay is such a huge driver of demand for social care. And that is because it can have a profoundly negative impact on people's long-term care needs. Obviously, if somebody's ill or they've had an accident, they've broken their hip, fractured neck or femur remains a #1 cause for admission for people over the age of 75, then they need to be in hospital. But the whole point about discharge is they need to be in hospital when they are in their acute phase. But as soon as they are well enough to go home, they should be supported to go home quickly. And there's lots of really international research on kind of quite how damaging it is for people's long-term outcomes if they don't get home quickly. I was just brushing up yesterday, found some really kind of quite powerful statistics. So for every 10 days that somebody spends in hospital beyond the point at which they need to be there, that it creates 10 years negative impact on their muscle tone and function. So for every extra day, that's a year of muscle tone that they will lose. And those for our older people, that's really hard to regain. They won't get that back again. And you know, those of you involved in this work will know, you know, there are real people in our hospitals and real families that are impacted by hospitalisation. And it's a moment of crisis. It's obviously can be a point of step change, material step change in care needs. But it is in our gift not to make that worse by keeping people in hospital and in the wrong place for longer than they need to be. And just some really kind of interesting research. I'll post the link in shortly. But hospitalisation for older people, it decreases their physical function. That is known. We know that. It increases their dependence. It can decrease their health-related quality of life. And that declines both when they're in hospital, but also in those first few weeks post-hospital discharge. So if we want to kind of get people back up, living independently, living good quality of lives, then getting them home quickly is just vital. You know, it is a point when they are dealing often with the challenges of adjusting to a change in their physical function, to the impact of their illness and the repercussions of their illnesses and homes. And yet we also know from research and surveys that older people want to live in their own homes as long as possible. So there's such an opportunity here, but also such kind of pressure and really easy, I think, for people, and the really long-lasting impact on their lives to get lost as we're doing this work. And for some people, they will never go home once they've been in hospital. And that's quite a shocking thing, I think, for us to sort of contemplate. They've had an accident, they've got an illness, they are possibly rushed into hospital in the back of an ambulance. They go to hospital, they've not said goodbye, they've not tidied up, they might even have left the washing up out and food in the fridge. And to think that people who've lived in that place and that building, that home, for 50 years may never go back again and may never get to say goodbye and close their lives down. And that's the real kind of human impact, I think, of this work. And I just would ask you to kind of hold that in your heads as we're talking about things today, because I absolutely believe that introducing technology, both to help people get home quickly and safely, but also to introduce technology in those few weeks after they've gone home to support their reablement, to support their rehabilitation and their recovery, and to help them perhaps to adjust to a change in their circumstances, but to use technology to help them to stay living independently in their own home is absolutely vital. And you can hear that I'm so passionate about this. And yet it is something that gets overlooked, that's forgotten. It's not an embedded part of our health and social care processes at the moment. And those of us who work in the care technology space know how transformational and supportive technology can be. So that is the kind of heart of the challenge, I think, that I'm kind of putting out to us all today, is how can we think about technology at a time when there are so many other things to think about, frankly. And we'll see some of the kind of real life experience of the pressure of hours and minutes that we have at the moment in trying to get people home. Discharge has become an increasingly high national priority. We've got proper discharge guidance for the first time over the last couple of years, and COVID has absolutely focused people's minds on that opportunity and the necessity for supporting effective hospital discharge. And during COVID, under the pressure of kind of getting people out of hospital so that those beds are free for people, obviously, who are suffering from COVID, or we thought were needed during the pandemic, we have moved heaven and earth, and we have shifted things enormously. And there's been ring-fenced funding for social care from the NHS to expedite that and make all of that smooth. that funding ends at the end of April this year. And so there's an additional challenge of how we don't sink back into the way we worked before, but how we keep that kind of laser-like focus on the importance of getting people home. And Lena's going to talk about virtual wards, but that's a really important way in which the kind of reach of the hospital is extending out into people's homes, and really also trying to think differently about how we can care for people best in their own and their own setting. Discharge to assess is at the heart of the sort of policy push at the moment, and discharge to assess has been around for quite a few years, but we're really starting to embrace it now. And the real sort of concept of discharge to assess is that when someone is in hospital and in a hospital bed and probably at their lowest ebb, that is not a good time for them and their families and us to be making decisions about their long-term care needs. They are probably at the peak of their need, and if they can get home and we have good reablement, good rehabilitation and recovery support, I'd argue with technology absolutely in that, their needs will diminish, and we can then assess their needs at a point when they're not at their peak of their needs, and we can make that long-term planning absolutely more to be strengths-based and to build on what that person actually wants from their lives and what they truly are capable of. Next slide, please, Elle. So just a reminder, for those who may not be immersed in discharge, we have national guidance. There's a link on this slide, but we broadly now talk about discharge pathways with this language now: pathway 0, pathway 1, pathway 2 and pathway 3. And it's interesting to me how quickly that's become our language, and it's actually really helpful, I think, for health and social care to work together. We know what we're talking about, we understand what that means. But just a really quick kind of recap, and this is in the tool that we've created for this masterclass. So people on pathway 0, which should be about half of the people that are going home, are people who can just go home. They're pretty fine, they're ready to go home, they need little or no additional support, they've got family, networks around them, and they can just go home and they're fine. I would argue that we should not forget about people on pathway 0 and the opportunity for technology to help them keep safe in those first few days post-hospital discharge, potentially avoid readmissions, but also to help technology maintain that independence, because there are still some pretty needy, vulnerable people on pathway 0. Pathway 1, so the broad aim is that sort of 45% of people are on pathway 1. So these are people who do need some help and support when they go home, but they might already have existing care and support in place, and that is maintained when they go home. They might need some input from community health teams, some rehabilitation support, some reablement support from social care professionals. So they're people who can go home but need some help during that period. And this is our biggest opportunity, I think, to really help people maintain independent living for longer, to minimise the need for long-term care and support. And so across pathway 0 and 1, 95% of our older people should be on pathway 0 and 1. Pathway 2 are people who do need to go, don't need to be in an acute hospital, but do need some kind of bedded support for their rehabilitation, assessment and care planning and recovery. So those are people who are going into rehab beds, into community beds. They might be going into nursing homes, but with rehab supported. And that is approximately 4% of discharges. And then pathway 3 are those people that I've spoken about who are probably not going back home, and they are going into a 24-hour bed-based care, and that should be less than 1% of discharges, and it kind of should be, really. You don't want to go into hospital, go straight into a care home or possibly a nursing home and never go home again. So there's some ambition and challenge for us all in these pathways, but a really helpful framework in terms of how we think about those pathways out of hospitals. Next slide, please, Elle. So how do we overlay technology into that, and what might be some of the technologies that we might think about using at that point? So I would argue start at day 0, so that actually they're still in hospital, it's the day of discharge, and there are technologies and devices that we can give people in the hospital to take home with them that can be simply activated and that will help to keep them safe for those first few days and weeks post-hospital discharge. And I'll show you some of those technologies in a moment. But basically, low cost, simple, quick to activate. It is a time, and I know there's a lot of different councils and hospitals initiating telecare at this point, but also some more digital solutions at this point, and some good work happening about stock and devices being kept in the hospital and literally being given to the person and activated so that they can take it home for them. Quickly, and this may have been assessed when they're still in hospital, but there's then day 1, day 2, actually there's something they need now. So in the same way that we might expedite putting equipment into someone's home, can we think about technology going in at this point, both to keep them safe and for peace of mind, but also starting to think about their recovery, reablement, rehabilitation needs. So are there devices, technologies we can put in that will help with their recovery and reablement, and actually can we get those in pretty quickly? Hopefully that happens, and then as we're moving through that reablement and rehabilitation period, their needs for technology might change, but this also might be the first time that that person has actually used technology and had technology in their lives to support their sort of care and daily living needs. So we shouldn't just put it in at day 2 and forget about it and leave it there. And thinking about how our reablement workers, in particular, our home care staff, our community health teams, can help to support somebody being confident and using that technology increasingly as part of daily living, is a really important part. And that's a new ask of that workforce, for them to think about themselves as kind of supporters and adopters of technologies. And obviously families and carers are a really important part of building that confidence there. And then kind of from 6 weeks out, in the same way that we might review somebody's long-term care and support needs, let's review their technology offer, let's adapt it. There might be things they don't need anymore, there might be some emerging needs. So the opportunity to just flex and shape a personalised approach to technology to hopefully set people off back in their own homes, living independently, possibly with new needs, but actually still able to meet those needs, and how we weave technology through that process, I think is the opportunity. But it is challenging work, and it was interesting preparing for this masterclass, trying to find some good examples. And I've been involved with working with 2 or 3 reablement teams over the last couple of years, and it's really hard to get some of those services to think about technology along with everything else that they're having to think about. So it's a real challenge, and I don't know that we've really cracked this yet. Next slide, please. So not recommending or any of these technologies, but just some examples of some of the things that I know councils, teams are now giving people as they leave hospital. And Julie Harrison's going to talk in particular about their experience of Birmingham using Own Phone, which is the device along the bottom there. But we've got this next generation now, so replacing telecare, of these digital devices, GPS devices. They have different functionalities. Some of them have falls detectors in, so they can help know if someone's fallen, but they are really simple devices. They're not heavy, they're not unattractive or too stigmatizing. They can be on people's necks, their keyring attached to their belt, but it's a device where they can just push a button and can speak to somebody. So you need to have a kind of alarm receiving center, monitoring center behind it, but they know that they can get help quickly and easily if they need it. And these definitely are preventing readmissions where they're being used. What I would say also, the benefit of some of these is it also helps the hospital staff feel confident in letting that person go home. So it doesn't just give the person themselves confidence that they can raise help if they need it, and their families, but it also, I think, allows the hospital staff think, actually, and not wanting to hold on to people unnecessarily, but thinking it's okay, that person can go home because I know they could get help and they'll be okay. And it's interesting to see the impact on the kind of mind shift. These things definitely get people home quicker and more smoothly and more safely. So there's a real opportunity there. Next slide, please, Elle. And then, as I just said, thinking about technology in terms of reablement and rehabilitation, and then those long-term care needs. And we're back into the world of all sorts of different types of devices and technologies. We've got smartwatches, we've got falls sensors and devices. There are devices for having people, again, kind of check in. So rather than calling help, just pushing a button and saying, yeah, I'm okay today. We have remote monitoring type technologies, sensors. Don't want us to forget the kind of consumer tech that people may already have in their homes. So how can we help them use Alexas and other smart home devices if their mobility is reduced, or to set up prompts and reminders for taking medicines, all sorts of possibilities. So we then open up into that much broader world. And we've got an adapted tablet there, lots of different types of adapted tablets available on the market. But for people who might have not much mobility or haven't used technology before, those video tablets can be a real lifeline into connecting with friends, family, social contact. But we can also use those to help deliver reablement or rehabilitation interventions, virtual consultations, so a really practical way of keeping people connected with their health and care teams, but them not having to go out all of the time. And as I said previously, getting those in for that reablement and recovery period, but then also adapting and thinking about what might be needed longer term as part of that discharge to assess process and that long-term care planning, really crucial. Next slide, please. So I hope I'm persuading you all that this is a good thing, but it's difficult work, and there are a lot of kind of quite practical reasons why this is hard. So when we're still in hospital, and even in those first few days home. So at the moment in particular, we're so pressured. We are seeing lots of transfers of care, and a lot of councils are running kind of bridging services. People aren't able to get straight from hospital into reablement. So people are passing through quite a few different organisations and different people responsible for delivering care over that first kind of 10-day sort of period. And whose job is it fundamentally to think about technology during those? I would argue it's everybody's job, but kind of when it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And at the day of discharge, hospital staff are trying to make sure people have got transport to home. They're trying to find keys. They're trying to make sure people have got milk and food in the fridge. There's an awful lot going on. So to ask those teams to also think about technology is quite a big ask. And some councils are piloting specialist roles now in the hospital who are the tech advisors, the tech assessors, and whose job it is solely to think about technology at that point. And then similarly, when we go home, reablement teams are busy. They're doing short visits. They're dealing with people with really high complex needs. So how do we encourage them, incentivize them to also think about technology as part of their work? It's difficult. There are a lot of conflicting pressures there. And my experience is that it isn't a priority for any of those teams. It will fall down their list. So thinking about our workforce models and how we can incentivize that is really crucial. Mustn't forget families and carers. They can be hugely enabling to helping people to embrace and use technology, and they need to understand it themselves and understand why it is a good thing, how it can work, how it can help them actually support their loved one better. My third, quickly, I'm really passionate about this, but we're very good in the health and care system of thinking that the technology belongs to the organisation, not to the person. And we'll see in some of Lena's work that there's a real disconnect between NHS provided technology and social care provided technology. And in my dream world, we have a joined up approach where actually the technology is with that person. They get it as they leave hospital or shortly afterwards, and it stays with them throughout. And actually the different services connect with and use that technology rather than requiring people to adapt and use our virtual consultation software or our falls alarm. We've got to adapt around them. It's not good for the person, it's confusing, it will act as a barrier to adoption, but also it's inefficient and expensive. We don't need to keep repeating this work, so how can we embrace that? Lots of widgety things around recording, tracking, installing, reviewing, but actually it's no good giving somebody something as they leave hospital if we don't know that they've got it, we don't know where it is, we don't know who's paying for it, we don't know who's going to retrieve it, we don't know what it's connected to. So there's some real kind of detailed process stuff which needs to be thought through. And I would also really remind us not to forget about our community beds. So people who are on pathway 2, but then we'll be going on to pathway 0 or pathway 1. So we focus on our kind of acute hospitals, but our community beds are really important too. And there's a real opportunity to introduce technology while people are in those beds as part of their rehabilitation process, and for them to take it home to help bridge that process. I absolutely believe, and I've seen this happen in some of the work we've been doing in Suffolk, that targeted use of technology could be the difference between somebody being on pathway 1, so needing some help and support, and pathway 0. If we get the tech offer right, they could actually go home with minimal support, but the technology providing what they need. So kind of good for everybody, really. And I would love it if we embedded technology into our discharge planning processes in hospitals, that it was overtly there in the same way that we think about equipment, that we've got our OTs and our therapy teams actually thinking about technology too. And experience from councils is that the hospital therapy teams and the OTs in particular can be really good champions for this if we can support them to do that work well. But they are pressured and busy, and they are spending really short amounts of time with people. So we need to make that easy for them. And finally, be persistent. Don't give up. This is hard work. It is complicated. There are lots of reasons to maintain the status quo and not try to adapt this. But I think, as I hope I've persuaded you all, there are also even more compelling reasons why we should stick at this. But so really, this is an area for persistence. It won't work the first time. We'll have to keep going round the block again. But if you can find your allies and find your good technologies, we can really make a material difference to people's lives. Next slide, please, Al. So I'm going to hand over now to Julie Harrison, who has lived and breathed everything that I've just described, and will bring it to life for you. And I know we'll share very openly some of what has worked and some of what hasn't worked in Birmingham. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Julie.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be with you. So I'm Julie Harrison, Commissioning Manager in Adult Social Care. I'm talking to you about Own Phone today and our use around supporting discharge, but also we're using Own Phone where people haven't got a telephone line as well in some instances. Next slide, please, Al. Thank you. So Own Phone, Anywhere Phone is the new one coming up. Sorry, that's on my brain at the moment. So Own Phone is used in quite a few councils at the moment, and you can see the examples there. Ours is the nice bright red one. So that connects into our Care Line Centre, which is our in-house telecare and monitoring centre. But there are other people that are using it, and quite a few units are out and about around the country as well now, working really well. So if anybody wants to talk to Chris from Anywhere Care, the details are there for you. Next slide, please. Brilliant. So this is our Own Phone, as I say. So what we started to talk about this with our Care Line service was a mobile device. And fortunately, what we were doing was talking just as the pandemic was about to hit. And what happened during the pandemic, as I'm sure it happened to everybody else, was our telecare service just moved to urgent referrals only. And obviously people didn't want to allow people into their homes during that time either. So we were getting massive concerns like the rest of the country around delays in hospital discharge. So what could we do? So we made the decision to buy 500 own phones at that point, and be able to connect it to our monitoring centre, but it was quick to deploy. So we started talking to our OTs and our social workers and hospital teams and enhanced assessment beds about how we could do this and how it would work. But funnily, they didn't want to talk to us at that point. So we were struggling to get any momentum around own phone. But then as all the issues started to be addressed around hospital discharge and management team got involved and wanted to really process that through, we started to get calls into us to say, heard you've got this, what can we do about it? So next slide, please, Al. So I said we bought 500 in April 2020. We've now purchased 750. It's worked that well. Own phone comes in 4 parts. So those are the parts it comes. So you get the little phone, you get the lanyard, you get the electronic cable so it can charge itself, and you also get, if you can't see in this white bag here, is a holder. So people can either wear it around their person, or they can leave it very close to phone or wherever it is that they want to leave it, so that they've got access to it really quickly. To date, we've issued 737 own phones, and recycling as well. We've recycled 104. We've got stocks in 6 of the hospital teams, so they hold stocks of about 10 phones, and in our community enhancement beds as well. We have lost, unfortunately, a few devices, so 40 at the moment, but it keeps rising because they're so mobile. But I'll come on to that in a minute. We also, as well as issue it from hospital, can deliver it to people's homes. So if people haven't got a landline or anything like that and an OT referral, we can deliver it to people's homes. Telecare is usually the best one to do, but we've had such an influx in telecare referrals. We're up at 155 a month. We've had real challenges on our system. And I think through the pandemic, what I'm hearing from social workers and OTs is that mobility has decreased because of shielding and various other things. So technology is just taking off big time around where, especially in Birmingham, where we are. You can lose bits of these kits really easily as well, unfortunately. So what we are having to do is talk to Chris and his team quite frequently and say, can we have some more chargers? But I have to say, Chris and his team are brilliant, really accommodating and get things through really quickly. Next slide, please, Al. So I know as a commissioner, it's always the question I ask, so how much is it going to cost me? So one own phone costs what I've got on there. If you buy 100, you can get a nice little discount, but don't forget the monitoring charge. So we get a monitoring charge onto Careline for the phone being active. So you get a one-off phone for the one-off charge for the unit. A SIM charge is an annual charge, so we get that every year, as long as that phone's active, and then the monitoring charge. So don't forget that as well. Next slide, please. So the benefits, as you can see, really easy to use, portable. Social workers love them now. It took a while, but once they realise how portable they are and how quick they are to deploy, they really got it. I'm going to come on to in a minute some of the issues around actually filling in the forms behind it, which was quite interesting. But as soon as that person is handed over the own phone, the social worker or OT or whoever's with them should make an immediate connection to the contact centre, so that they know that that phone is live, and the family know it's live, the person knows it live, and the hospital team know it's live as well. So I mentioned about the occupational therapist with no landline. It's really quick to order. Chris and the team are brilliant, as I've said. And what they do provide us is how active the phones have been, so we can trace and see who's using the phones. And they are easy to recycle once you can get them back in, because funnily enough, once we give them out, people love them. I mean, we've spoken to a majority of the initial 500, and the people out there using them really like them. They really like the mobility. So yeah, it's quite hard to get some of them back, but we have managed to recycle some of them. So next slide, please. So the issues around, and funnily enough, we've had a big issue this weekend. So I've mentioned about the struggle to deploy. What we want social workers to do as they give the own phone out is obviously prepare for discharge. So they need to complete a form on our Care First, our care management system. This must be done so Careline know who the own phone's been given to, they know the name, they know the address. Unfortunately, as Claire mentioned, social workers are extremely busy and they forget to do this. And then on Saturday evening, we had a gentleman activate his own phone, but unfortunately was having breathing difficulties and couldn't speak. The operator, bless her, very diligently was really concerned, couldn't speak to him, didn't know who he was, where he was calling from, went back over all the old activations for the week before and found that one hadn't had a referral form in and sent an ambulance to that address. Fortunately, it was the right address. We don't know from the ambulance team what happened to that person, but we still managed to get the ambulance to the right address even without the form being filled in. But I can tell you on Monday morning, that was a bit scary to find that in your inbox and how to deal with it. But the diligence of the Careline operator was brilliant. Social care colleagues as well around own phone at the moment is basic, but talking to Chris about the development to be a GPS tracker and a falls detector. So more functionalities coming on that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Plus what we found as well is that own phones are really easy to lose in busy offices. So we have tried to put them under lock and key and spreadsheets everywhere, but you can imagine social workers don't like those either. So it's trying not to be over the top, but making sure everybody's safe and people, when they phone through or activate the own phone, Careline know where to send the ambulance or any help that they need. So citizens' concerns. I have to say, social workers don't always show them how to use the own phone, which is a real shame, or activate it. Sometimes they activate it without the person there, which is a real shame. We've got over most of these hurdles now. Obviously, we had the hurdle on Saturday. We also get citizens phoning up Careline to say that their own phone's not working and things like that. So we go out and have a look and it's not been charged because they're not used to technology, and they lose bits as well. We've also had instances, unfortunately, when somebody's come out of hospital and gone to an EAB bed and they've had two own phones. So again, social workers not really checking what's been deployed for that person on discharge. So we've managed to retrieve some of those back, but we have lost some as well. And I've said about the forget to charge. So next slide, please, Al. And then the big thing for me around own phone is that telecare units hunt when they are activated on an emergency call for an answer, and they will not stop until the answer is made. Unfortunately, with own phones, we have 3 telephone lines that take all the 750 own phone activations in, and that call can drop off. Now, we've not had that happen, but it's just to raise your awareness. It's not like a telecare unit where it will hunt for an actual answer. So you do have to be careful with it. But as I say, we've not had an issue with it at the moment. So next slide, please, Al. So going forward, obviously it works really well in hospital discharge. The teams really love it. We just need to make sure they fill the forms in. I've had to send quite a terse email this week to say if we have to take stocks back, if we get some more of these issues, hopefully fingers crossed. It's not, we haven't had many of these issues. And as you see, we've issued quite a few of these phones out. So one of the other things we do suggest as well is so we can recover the own phones so they're available for hospital discharges. If the hospital team think that person needs telecare, to do 2 referrals, one for an own phone and then one for telecare, where we can recover the own phone. So they go back into the hospital discharge team and that person has a longer telecare system. So obviously then it's hunting for the call if it's activated. But people do love the home phone as well, and they don't want to give it back, bless them. So yeah, the better process for recovery is people do lose them, but they do love them as well. So trying to get them back is quite hard. Originally, when we put the phone out, we didn't put a telephone number on the back if people wanted to return it, or an address, thinking that they would activate the phone, but then they've lost the charger. So we've now done that. We are starting to get more back now. People are referring for telecare. And the additional functionality, as I said, talking to Chris, developing now an anywhere phone, so we can get a GPS tracker, 3 calls and a falls detector in that, and an alarm. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you, Claire.
Brilliant, thanks, Julie. And there's a few questions coming in for you, but do keep the questions coming in. I'll put those to Julie at the end. But I'm really delighted now to introduce Lena Ramsden, who's going to give us a whistle-stop tour on virtual wards. The particular reason that I've asked Lena to come is, virtual wards have expanded during COVID, and as Lena will set out, there are many more coming. But at the moment, there is quite a disconnect between how the NHS is working on virtual wards and how social care are participating and supporting this work. And I think there's just a huge opportunity for us to join this up better. And I know Lena will set some of that out too. So I'll just hand you over to Lena. She's the transformation lead for NHS-EI in the Midlands region, urgent and emergency care, and I think has learned a huge amount during COVID about virtual wards, now our local expert. So I'll hand you over to Lena. Thanks, Lena.
Thank you, Claire, and morning to everyone, and thank you for inviting me, and this is a great opportunity for me to present today. So I hope I'll give justice and enough information. If not, then we can definitely connect after and make sure that we continue that relationship. Next slide, please. So I will cover quickly today the overview in terms of the why the virtual wards, the definitions and operating model, the ambition and funding, some principles and different models, and I'll touch briefly on technology-enabled solutions we have so far and some examples of good practice in the region. Next slide, please. So virtual ward overview, and I'll start with a why, as Claire has done. Next slide, please. In terms of the risks for individuals that are in hospital as inpatients, there's 40% of people over 85 die within 1 year of hospital admission. The elderly don't fear death, they fear loss of independence. And if you are admitted through the crowded ED, you have 43% mortality increase if admitted for 10 days and more. As Claire touched upon as well, in terms of the bed rest, 10 to 20% muscle strength gets lost per week if your admission is for more than 3 days and can convert independent frail person to an actually dependent one. And statistically, if you are 77, you have more than 1,000 days left to live. And how many of those would you choose to have it in a hospital? And what we have adopted across the region and across kind of national sites is the mantra in terms of what matters to me. It's not what is the matter with me. We should be asking that and being aware of every patient. And going back to the last 1,000 days, it's not just over 77. Any one of us could still have only 1,000 days left to live. And I think is being mindful of that powerful message in terms of what we put our patients through and why it's important to pay attention to every opportunity and every detail we have in our hands. Next slide, please. So this is just to visually showcase the kind of chain reaction of somebody being admitted inappropriately or staying rather in a hospital bed where they shouldn't be. So for somebody waiting on a trolleys, and I'm sure you've seen many of those in the media, for a bed, and they cannot get that bed because there's somebody there admitted inappropriately, no longer needs to stay in the bed. And like Claire touched on, many discharge pathways, we cannot get them into the right care. Then as a result, we have ambulances waiting outside of our acute trusts, and we have quite a lot of long waits at the moment, both for both of our providers in the region, WOMAS and EMAS, and also somebody who needs it in the community. The ambulances cannot get to them. And just a reminder that actually hospitals are there for emergencies and for those that need our elective care and critical care, and making sure that we understand those chain reactions and understand where our decisions lie in that chain. Next slide, please. If we can get through those two, yes, what the hospital's for. So virtual wards, and that's quite a busy slide, so I will not read all of it, and I'm sure the slides will be shared and you'll be able to kind of read that at your leisure. So just quickly touched on the multi-professional principles of the virtual wards. And as you can appreciate, there has been some of the various ways in how the virtual wards have been addressed during the pandemic and what they kind of becoming to be. So what is very clear actually that it is not a replacement for face-to-face care, and I highlighted that, and that's extremely important to note. Virtual wards allow patients to remain and return home quickly, and hopefully that's the best place for them rather than a hospital bed. So during the pandemic, COVID virtual wards were stood up, and a lot of the ICSs, apart from one of the ICS in the region, took advantage of having the COVID virtual wards, and there's a lot of learning in terms of the impact of that. But what we also have embraced is the digital technology such as pulse oximeters and apps, making sure that those patients that can be monitored are able to be monitored, and we equip them with technology to do so. So just a couple of, drivers for virtual wards. So very classic, reduction of length of stay for patients, relieve pressures for acute hospitals, as I mentioned, making sure that our ambulances get to the right patients rather than wait outside of our acute trust, improved recovery process for patients, and virtual wards are very much the priority in the 22 and 23 planning guidance, and currently very high priority across different providers for health. And the principles of virtual ward is, once again, it's what already Claire touched upon, is empowering nurses and our allied health professionals and partners to lead the change in clinical decision making and promote earlier discharge, secondary care or community led, with consultant oversight with an MDT approach. And it is very time limited. Virtual wards are not there forever, and making sure that we understand and employ those principles and have governance in place to allow that. To also kind of have support for non-specialist teams looking after the respiratory frailty patients, and specialist health and care professional skill sets better utilized in a virtual ward setting. And like I said, it's just to mention the few, but there's quite many more in terms of drivers and principles for virtual wards. Next slide, please. I'm a fan of visuals, so I wanted to make sure that I shared this. And I think this is probably one of the really good summaries in terms of where virtual ward sits, but also to showcase the complexity in terms of managing our patient journeys. So it's very self-explanatory in terms of the different levels of where we actually managing the patients and what we actually can offer to our patients. So it starts with level 1 being preventative care, and level 2 being long-term condition management, level 3 being coordinated care, and level 4, that's when we start to get into a virtual ward care, and level 4B is your hospital at home. Now, you will appreciate that quite a lot of this model has to be supported by quite robust program definitions, technology, data, workforce has to support all of that. And I think that's where the complexities come in. But I think for clarity and for visualizing where it all comes in, I think this is quite a powerful and simple image, which I don't think we do very well in NHS, things to be quite complex a lot of the times. Next slide, please. So this very much kind of showcase where the virtual ward fits in. Now, as a program lead for the region, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of confusion in terms of terminology. And this slide hopefully kind of splits things in quite clearer buckets. So when we talk about virtual health, we mean probably that kind of two things. We mean, what is our virtual care? So that's very much provided by the enhanced healthcare at home, but not as an alternative to hospital. And it has a couple of examples underneath in terms of what it means for stable patients, what it means for the escalating patients, for acute care, and for the perioperative care. So virtual wards arena is very much kind of enhanced healthcare at home as an alternative to hospital. So that's when we talk about those patients that do not need to be in an acute bed anymore, and how can we actually provide them with support and help them to step out of that acute setting into a well-managed virtual ward arena that is very much supported by either nursing or consultants or any other professional teams. And once again, there's a couple of examples and I expand on them a little bit further in a bit. Next slide, please. So nationally, ambition for 22 and 23. So you'll be pleased to notice that the huge new program of work. So we're starting kind of in a good place where we have a lot of learning from COVID virtual wards and oximetry at home, but we're expanding the program with an ambition that we will have about 40 to 50 virtual ward beds per 100K population. There has been some modeling done, and we clearly need to review that and to kind of break that down a bit further. So it could be more than that, it could be less than that, and it's not a mandated target at this stage. And we need to understand what it means for each ICS. And very much ambition sits with the fact that we need to maximize the overall bed capacity to include virtual wards. And it needs to prevent virtual wards from becoming a new community-based safe netting service. They should only be used for patients who would otherwise be admitted to an NHS acute hospital bed or to a facilitated early discharge. We need to manage the length of stay by establishing clear criteria to admit and to reside to services, and to just fully exploit remote monitoring technology, as we touched upon that earlier on in the day. What the expectation is that ICSs will submit their plans as a system, not on a side-by-side basis, and that is huge. That means that the systems really have to pull together in terms of their ambition and what they will do for their population, for virtual wards. And this is a 2-year transformation program, which is very pleasing to hear for me. I'm a transformation professional, and I like to see the programs that actually evolve and allow time to be what they truly need to be. So this is not just for 22 and 23, it's also for the following year going forward. Next slide, please. So you'll be pleased to hear there's quite a lot of funding attached. For financial year 22-23, there's 200 million available nationally, and that sum of money will be split into fair share basis. And for the Midlands region, we have an allocation of 38.8 million for 22-23, and there's going to be 250 million available for 23-24. We expect ICSs to submit their plans by April 1st, so the money will be available for April 1st. And we're only asking them to submit their high-level plans at this stage, and we as a regional team will support them and guide them through in terms of what they need to do in terms of their setup, their impact, the measuring success, and all of these wonderful things that transformation comes with. The second lot of money will be released at the second part of the year, and that will very much rely on the outputs that we will achieve in the first half of the year. So systems will be expected to have tangible results already by September, October time to receive the second part of that allocated funding. Next slide, please. I will not go through in terms of the principles of the virtual ward, but there's quite a lot of detail attached and the expectation attached. And I was really actually pleased to see that detail, because I know how daunting it is to start something new for systems, and those guides actually really exist to help them and support them through. So national team have done really well to support this program of work. So as you would appreciate, big emphasis on clinical governance and criteria to admit and reside, as I already touched upon, in terms of the escalation procedures and consent or self-support. So we will really need to involve our patients and support our patients for them to have confidence in this new way of working. And it will be daunting, and we'll need to make sure that we listen to all of those anxieties that our patients voicing, and we need to really understand our population. And technology doesn't solve all of the problems. I sometimes, even personally as a patient, like to have that face-to-face and somebody actually showing me. So we mustn't get consumed by the opportunities of technology and really be mindful of what capabilities we have upon our patient groups. As I mentioned already, these are the time-limited interventions, and we need to understand how we can actually integrate different services and how we're going to be able to expand our services. And yes, the digital inclusion, as I mentioned just now, is going to be really important. Just quickly going back to the clinical governance, we've been doing a lot of work with our region already, and there is a lot of anxiety amongst our clinicians as well in how they're going to manage the virtual wards. So we have to work through that. Luckily, we have some fantastic clinical champions for this already. So we're not starting completely from scratch. And, you know, if you have a chance to listen to any of those clinical champions speak, it's quite empowering. And I think we really need to make sure that we support our clinicians as well as nurses and anybody else involved in making sure that we don't just actually say you have to do this. We need to make sure that we go through a period of understanding where we can get to, where our limitations are, and what challenges we have. Next slide, please. So there's different kind of models that we propose that could be implemented. So mostly remote. So this is based on technology-enabled remote monitoring and self-management with minimal face-to-face provision. Or we have a blended model where technology is enabled, but face-to-face provision, such as hospital at home. And I kind of refer you back to that model that I shared, that one slide visual. So there's different ways how we can do that, but as I mentioned, all of that has to be backed up in terms of the how it's managed, who the patient cohorts are. So we're very clear with the patients as well as our colleagues who are managing that, that we're not getting confused and we're not actually creating something that is unclear and actually does more harm than good. Next slide, please. So I think Claire touched upon kind of managing risk, and we want to make sure that there's some decision-making tools that will help our teams, and this is just touching on one of them called Brand Tool. So it's all about managing the risk across the entire patient pathway and asking those questions at any point of the patient journey in terms of what are the benefits, what are the risks, what are the alternatives, and what if I do nothing. And particularly on the alternatives part, we need to make sure that we equip our teams with the knowledge of what's available. We can't expect everybody who's managing patients day to day will also be aware what the national and regional teams are working on. And I think we just need to make sure that we back any of the transformation program with clear communication across all staff groups and make sure that we actually practically show how it works. Next slide, please. And this is just to add a bit of humor, which if you haven't seen this little cartoon, I really enjoy showing that. And I think this is about, there is no such thing as no risk or safe. It's just safer or lower risk. And that's something that we need to really be mindful when we're implementing virtual wards, because it will be daunting. But I think we shouldn't just stop at a very classic back to baseline, medically fit for discharge, no safe to go home, and we just really need to move forward in terms of our thinking. Next slide, please. So very quickly touching on technology enabled solutions, going through next slide and probably the next slide after, please. There are a number of technology solutions already implemented across the region, and some systems use some of them, some systems use a couple of them. And I know when Claire will share the slides after, I have more examples in the appendices in terms of which system uses which solution. Now, all of them play a very different part in what they address, but good news is that across the region we have the platform that enables any technological solution to be plugged in and used. So I think this is just to kind of showcase the plethora of things available. Next couple of slides will be very much about the examples of good practice. So I'm sharing an example from the Warwickshire North Care Homes, where they used Docobo as a telehealth system to manage their COVID virtual wards. And I'm not going to read through the whole slide, but they've seen quite a lot of integrated um, way of working and collaborative working within the commissioners community and hospital providers and PC and clinical leads and county council and of course care homes. So if you require any more detail on that, I'm more than happy to find out and share about that, but just wanted to touch base upon that. And the next slide very much focuses about the example at Royal Wolverhampton Trust, where they actually really embraced the non-COVID virtual ward implementation and very much kind of using the internal digital solutions to try and manage their patients. And I think with a new transformation program, that gives them a good platform to then look for any digital solutions kind of long term. And if we go through a couple of next slide, I also included Dudley Group, who actually have been really learning from their COVID virtual ward and converted that ward into their now acute respiratory infection virtual ward. And they actually led this really fantastic piece of work internally where they literally said, we need to understand where our patients are. We need to understand as clinicians and nurses how we're managing, what the length of stay are. And it's just really going down to basics internally before they kind of take any of the technology solutions. And this has been really great to watch because it has been really led by clinicians and nurses and it works for them. And that's the key thing with virtual wards. We will have to really tailor make what works for every single system. One size will not fit all. And that's being really mindful of that. So hopefully that we'll see more examples of that where systems actually embrace the change and kind of make it their own. Next slide, please. There's a lot of resource nationally. So this is a slide just to summarize and give you some links in terms of what currently exists. And there's also contacts for the regional team as well as the national team. As Claire mentioned, I'm the regional team lead for virtual wards and very much kind of looking forward to working with anyone and everybody across health and social care and anybody else who are actually involved. This is a fantastic opportunity to be at the start of the journey. This is a 2-year transformation program and there's quite a lot of change that will be revolutionary both for patients as well as acute trusts as well as anybody involved. And I'm personally very excited to be leading on this and hopefully I can get as many of colleagues on board. And in the meantime, if you need any information or have any questions, I have my contact details on the slide. Thank you, Claire.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lena. That was brilliant. You covered so much ground, so I really appreciate that. Could you take the slides down, Alan? We'll just move to the Q&A, and do feel free if we want more questions in the chat, but I'm going to pick up some of the threads that we've covered already. Julie, if you could rejoin us. Sorry, I've my screen's gone slightly wrong, and Lena as well. Right, I'm going to just put a couple of questions to Lena first, but there's some stuff, Julie, that we need to kind of go back to for you as well. But it struck me, Lena, and I think there's been some question in the chat as you were talking that there's an opportunity. I mean, even in some of your slides and presentation, I guess, but how do we start to show the social care contribution and fit to what you've been describing? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think as a regional team, we're very much cognizant of the fact that those connections haven't been necessarily made in the past or showcased in the past. So I know that's part of these new transformation initiatives. What we're saying to each of our ICSs is understanding how the governance will be set up for virtual wards and who actually needs to be on those boards or steering groups or whatever they want to call. So for example, we already have a couple of ICSs that set up their boards for virtual wards, and I know that they're starting to look at their colleagues who attend, and I think those invites need to be extended into the arena of the social care and care homes and whoever are the most appropriate people. And what I'm also saying here, Claire, I think if you feel that you need to be part of it or get involved, more than happy to do those connections. And I think this is the time probably where we need to kind of get together, not by invite, but also raising the hand and saying, I want to play the part and I want to understand more connectivity, and can I be part of the board or steering group? And this is the right time. And I know Nottingham ran their first ICS virtual ward group 2 weeks ago. I think there's one coming up on Monday, and we will be encouraging as a region to get more of them set up and running. So I think these are the forums where we should be either having colleagues sit on or invite themselves on really at this stage.
So, I mean, when you're kind of, if we're in the home and putting ourselves in the position of the patient or resident or service user, it's quite possible that they might be receiving home care alongside while still being in a virtual ward. So there's just a practical kind of joining up and sense making, isn't there, for commissioners and then the care providers to just know that this is happening. But then also, frankly, how could we use the home care providers to perhaps support some of the SATs monitoring, or there's just such an opportunity, isn't there, to sort of think differently about what's happening in people's homes.
And I think what I encourage, I'm the service improvement manager through and through, and it's just taking back to basics and kind of doing a bit of mapping in terms of what we have across the entire patient population. And I know it's not an easy task a lot of the times, but I was talking to our digital lead and I just said, Ian, do we actually have a matrix where we understand per each ICS what we have digitally enabled and what technology we use and what actually we touch in which bit of the patient pathway? And I think that's might be one of the really painful but really useful exercises to do, and that should be one of our first exercises we do at the start of each transformation program. So yes, if it goes back, if you haven't been involved, it's the right time to get involved. But you're right, there's going to be a lot of confusion, a lot of potential duplication if we're not careful. And if we don't do that exercise, we will be forever spinning in our own circle.
And just practically thinking about, monitoring and responder services that social care might be commissioning that sit behind, be that telecare or some of the more modern digital technologies. Again, it's like there's a workforce and a monitoring thing there that we need to make sense of for the person, but it's a huge opportunity to kind of think about that differently.
And I think you'll appreciate there's a lot of pots of money. Dedicated for technology. So in that pot of money that I mentioned, which is 38.8 million for Midlands region, but 200 million nationally, 82% is an expectation will be spent on workforce, but about 8% is expected to be spent on some sort of technology or licensing. So you're right. Once again, we need to make those connections and be cited before we spend another X amount of £1 million on something different to what we potentially already have or has some sort of connectivity. So huge task. But we have an opportunity to do that now, and I think that's the right time to do that.
And I just think it's just kind of underlying why it's so useful to have you here today, Lena. And I can see there's already a desire to have a Midlands much more joined up conversation, because this, for me, this falls into people don't know what they don't know. And it would, and I think Sam commented about the language, virtual ward. Unless you know what it is and what it means, you could, as a social care commissioner or you just think, well, that's nothing to do with me, that's the NHS. But when you look inside the box and see what it is, you kind of think, well, this is delivering health and care in people's homes. That's completely my world and my business. But I think the more we can kind of raise awareness, and then for me, I'm always a fan of, so yes, get the governance right, but actually let's unpick this at a local level, because it will be different everywhere, won't it?
And I think I'm very aware that I shared quite a lot of complex slides. And there's a call for a bit of a national comms campaign to simplify the message for patients, for as well as any healthcare professional or anybody involved in touching the patient at any point. And I think that's really what's going to be kind of the difficult bit. And I know, Claire, when you share kind of more detailed slides, there is one slide of definitions, but even if you look at those definitions, think, all right, okay, I need to read it 3 times to probably make it clear in my head. But it's just a reminder that it's a 2-year transformation program. Yes, we have a lot of complexity at the minute. Yes, we're unpicking a lot of different things, but it will get clearer the more we talk about it. It will become hopefully more simplified, and hopefully the more we start to talk about it and the more we start to onboard and offboard the patients, we'll do a bit more learning each time. And I think this is why it's so important for everybody to be involved, so everybody gets the say in what their view of the virtual ward is. So more than happy to have a volunteer on our regional steering group if anybody's interested.
Okay, I think we'll put that offer out. Thanks, Lena. And just to say, we will be sharing the slides on this, but Lena had a fuller deck as well, so we will share the extended version as part, because there's much more. There's so much more to say on this topic, isn't there? I'm sure, frankly, having worked in the NHS as well, that virtual wards are kind of, the join up with community health teams and potentially with mental health teams as well is another kind of join up challenge. And I can sense that it's possible that might come first before there's even a thought about social care. And I just really encourage us all for social care to just kind of, as Lena says, put your hands up and say, we want to be part of this.
So Claire, just to quickly mention the mental health, and I'm glad you brought that up. The remote monitoring digital solutions, and all of these solutions are kind of put up on, or kind of technology solutions that are available. Under remote monitoring, we have 4 component parts that we have. So it's how we manage long-term conditions, how we support care homes, virtual wards, as well as mental health. So some of those will have opportunity to support mental health. And I know when I shared in a fuller deck by ICS, you'll be able to see which solutions actually support that. So in the Midlands, I think we have, once again, that technology enablement is what that means practically. And I think somebody put up in the chat for Julie in terms of, have we actually measured the impact, or have we seen the impact? And that's I think the most difficult bit. Technology is almost like the easy part. You plug something in and you use it, but is measuring that impact. So mental health sits very much within the remote monitoring side of kind of management of virtual wards in different parts.
And that's a whole other probably webinar and joining up. But obviously, many people with chronic long-term mental health conditions are under the auspices of social care teams as well. And I know social care teams around the country are thinking about technology to support. So it's just another opportunity. And I'm just going to speak frankly to my social care colleagues now, but there's a lot of funding coming out for virtual wards in a way that we don't often see the same level of funding coming out for social care technology. And I just think there's a real opportunity to expedite some of our work as well. And I know, speaking to some councils over the last few weeks, there's a real appetite to kind of get on the front foot in the expectation of money coming out and knowing what it is you want to do. And this just seems to me such a compelling opportunity that also has potentially some funding with it for us to really kind of join stuff up around people in their homes. Just what an amazing thing that would be. Apologies for indulging some of my passion around that, but I hope that there's lots more comments, Lena. We'll come back. Language is coming up as, like, we're using this. Is virtual ward a great term for this? Is it really describing what actually is about health and care in people's homes? And but I'll let you pick that up. Just finally then, and you touched on this a little bit, Lena, the sort of the safety issue and the kind of resistance to adoption. So obviously there's some concern about people themselves and their families wanting to be comfortable with this, but I think you hinted at this, but my sense is that there's also, there's quite a lot of resistance amongst clinical staff. Could you just talk about that a bit and how you're kind of challenging that? Because I know particularly hospital teams are so, their world does tend to stop at the car park sometimes, and they don't appreciate what amazing care and how much risk is held in the community kind of without that oversight. But I'm just interested in what you might be doing to sort of, and how the technology might be helping with that as well.
So you absolutely touched on such a sore point, and I think that's what we spend at least last 3 months doing is having conversations, understanding where the anxieties are. So unless we understand where those kind of pinch points are, we can't address really those points. And I think, like I mentioned in my presentation, kind of luckily COVID has given us kind of, well, we had to create a virtual ward. We had no choice. So I think that automatically has created a bit of a platform for us that we can kind of say, well, actually, we managed COVID. We understand that we're going into different arena now. It will not be the same. However, we need to understand how we can actually still relieve the pressure of the acute trust. And it's just going back to those whys. I think, like you said, a lot of clinicians, they're seeing the patient in front of them, but it's the why bit that we don't touch upon every single day. And luckily, we have a fantastic clinical lead nationally, Matt Inada Kim, who's tirelessly talks about taking the risk and actually being there to support clinicians when they take that risk. And also regionally, we have 2 dedicated clinical leads who are so passionate, and Dudley was one of the examples. So Paul is one of our clinical leads, and he's literally, being a champion in starting something new. And that's what you want to see from clinical leads. And, Paul then kind of takes that conversation on with other clinicians. So it's kind of going back to those basics, like I said, is having those conversations, not just kind of pushing a template in front of them, because that's where the resistance comes in, and giving them the promise that they will have that net of safety somewhere, that we will kind of catch them when they fall. And I think there's a lot to work through in terms of that clinical governance. But those virtual wards that we already have live, we have SOPs. So we share those SOPs widely in the region. So if somebody who already has frailty, non-COVID virtual ward, and somebody who already wants to start, we say, well, let's take something already that somebody's tested. So there's a lot of sharing of understanding and knowledge, and it's just talking at this stage, really.
Okay. Julie, I'm going to come back to some of the questions we've got for you. There's a kind of theme about measurement and impact, and how you might know whether these have saved bed days or got people home more quickly, and a question about whether or not you can see how much people are actually using the own phones.
So yes, we can see if people are using the own phones from the activation reports. The bed days is an interesting one. We don't have a fully formed benefits realisation programme, unfortunately. What I'm just talking to our management team about is to bring in a transform tech service that will both embed culture change and benefits realisation programmes, so we can really start to understand the impact of deploying savings it's made, but the impact on that person's life. And how it's kept them at home. Interestingly, the virtual ward thing, we're calling it staying independent at home. So that's what we're starting to theme it through, and actually putting gardening, tech in there, decluttering, all kinds of different things to just get people home from hospital. So, but yeah, bed day is really important. But no, we're not counting those at the moment.
No, and it's back in that tricky territory of avoided, I suppose. You don't know what would have happened if you hadn't done it, so it's tricky. But I do think that just thinking about how we might between us kind of evidence some of those interventions would be really interesting and helpful. I'm not going to repeat, so just to be clear, we're not endorsing own phone, and there's been some interesting chat about different options. I think Julie was fairly open about some of the deficits of own phone and how it, what you've kind of uncovered using it. I guess what I wanted to ask you, Julie, is if you were kind of going to buy something like this now, what, have you got a kind of model specification in your mind that you might sort of put out there?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we were talking to Chris about another product, because what I'm conscious of is own phone has worked well with social workers, and I don't want to completely confuse them with a different product. So it's building on what's working well and having that additional functionality in it as well. And don't forget, people themselves are saying they like it. So if we can have that additional functionality, the falls GPS tracker, that would be brilliant. And we're about to start trialing it. Chris is getting it ready for market now. So it's yes, I would be willing to talk about anything, but we've tried it, it's working and working really well.
And that's an interesting kind of different take on that, which is, so I suspect you've got in your head, well, and you've kind of shared it in the slides, and where you had some deficits, actually you've got a willing provider who's now wanting to develop and address those with you, as opposed to somebody who hasn't got anything might go to the market and say, actually, it's got to work out of the home, it's got to have a GPS tracker, why wouldn't it have false functionality in it? But I think what you're saying, the power of the simplicity of it and the fact that it's now embedded, moving on, would be possibly a bit of an own goal there. Okay. And just I think it was a question about kind of the longevity of the own phone, and kind of what, why would you switch it off and switch someone on to telecare if the own phone is digitally compatible and is potentially delivering what you need longer term? Just a kind of question about
so I think I alluded to it in the tracking. So if somebody activates the own phone, it has 3 telephone lines to go in, and potentially that call can be dropped. Whereas the telecare units are now IP ready, so they are digital ready. As long as that person's got Wi-Fi, we can put GSMs in as well. But telecare hunts and will not stop until he has got a care line operator on the phone to assist that person. And that for me is the big one. If we can lose a call, and we haven't today, as far as I'm aware, that fills me with dread. So it just worries me that could happen. So that's where telecare for me comes in, because it will hunt.
Okay. So that's some really quite detailed functional stuff, but kind of really, really important stuff there.
Yeah.
And just finally, Julie, can I just ask you a bit, and there was a bit of a comment in the chat about the potential for specialist tech roles at the back door of the hospital, or have you played with any of that, or what's your kind of view of the workforce issue? Because social workers not recording things, I know, has been a bit of a bugbear for you.
Always. And they're very busy people, to be fair. Love them to bits, but they are really busy and got huge caseloads in Birmingham. So totally appreciate that. Yeah, where we're at to is, with all the evidence we've got through own phone and telecare, is that as we go into a transform tech service, I think we need to evolve the service. But I would like to have tech advisors available, and then develop our social workers into being able to do that. I don't think to go full hog straight away would be really helpful, especially as we see the issues coming through day on day. And talking to social workers, they don't want to do that initially. But what I am excited about is the virtual tech house that potentially could help us do that. So we'll see where that goes.
Okay. And I guess, just to finish my thread for the day, but if we're thinking about specialist tech facilitators to activate social care technology, and we've got virtual wards roll out, can't we have an integrated health care tech facilitator post who's supporting all of that stuff together? That would be amazing.
It would be.
As always, thanks so much, Lena and Julie. I'm going to hand back to Georgia to wrap up. I've not left her enough time again, but there we go.
5 minutes is more than enough. Thanks, Claire. My colleague Elle is just about to post some polls in the chat, and we'd be really grateful if you could fill them out. There are 2. So while I'm speaking, if you could, oh, there they are now, I've just appeared on my screen. That would be much appreciated. Thank you. While you fill that in, I'll just a reminder that the tool that Claire presented today, as well as an accessible recording and slide deck, will be available on our CHIP Digital Resource Centre. For those of you who haven't heard about this site yet, it's the home of all of our resources that are emerging from this programme of work, and is continually updated. So even if you visited it before, please do visit it again. Thank you. I can see all the responses coming in from the first poll. Second poll has just appeared. Elle, if we can have the slides up, that would be ideal. Then I can show you the next events in the Masterclass series, which are the Digital Access for All Masterclass and the Working with the Care Market Masterclass later in March. In advance of these masterclasses, it would be really useful to hear how you found this masterclass. The polls are essential for that. Thank you for filling them out. But we also have a short evaluation form, which Gemma's already posted in the chat. Thank you, Gemma. But I will also send out a quick email straight after the masterclass. It's only 5 minutes, so please do fill it out if you have the time. As you can see, if you do want to continue these discussions, please do visit the DTAST network. This is a closed group for local government colleagues where you can share all things digital, essentially, experiences, projects, ideas, etc. So please do join that if you haven't already. And as we said, slides and everything will follow and will also be posted on that network. So just before we close, I'd like to say a thank you to Rethink Partners for organising this masterclass and Claire for presenting the amazing tool you've produced. Thank you to Elle for taking us through the slides. Thank you to our amazing guest speakers, Julie and Lena. We're so grateful to you both for giving up your time and sharing your experiences today. Lots of thank yous coming through in the chat about how useful it's been. And finally, thank you to everyone else for attending. We hope you've found it useful and we hope to see you at the next one. I'll leave our contact details up on the final page for a few minutes. But other than that, I think I'll close the masterclass. Thank you, everyone.